The objective is to have a Palestinian state on the borders of 1967 that will live in
peace and security.
The lesson of history is that peace and security do not come easily.
Peace and stability
Must decide whether we are serious about peace and security. To recognize Israel's legitimacy and its right to exist in peace and security. That's how we will find new pathways to peace and security. That is the work that we must do.
In peace and security.
Peace and security and coexistence.
A movement towards peace. If we have this triangle, economy, security, and peace, then peace can succeed.
It is morning. You wake up.
Hey, come on.
You greet your loved ones. You grab the morning paper. And although it seems like any ordinary day, it isn't. For one extraordinary reason.
A historic and unprecedented event has occurred. The question of whether or not we are alone in the universe has been answered.
This is so cool.
Warships have just arrived over India, England, and Germany.
I really don't think they flew 90 billion light years to come down here and start a fight.
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all!
They're using our own satellites against us. The clock is ticking.
It's over.
Years from now, they're gonna ask, where were you when they took over the planet?
You'll be fine. I promise. It's over. I'm sorry, but it's over.
I think it's time.
Your faith in us, but never in yourselves. From here, the fight will be your own.
We're running out of time. We're running out of clues. And there's an invasion coming. So really, we need to go right now.
War has started.
My dad said they'd come. He said, we ain't alone. He said, one day we find them. Or they find us.
How desperate are you? And you call on such lost creatures to defend you.
Our enemy can take any shape. You have made me very desperate. They could be anywhere.
We're not a team. We're a time bomb.
This is nothing we were ever trained for.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Revelation Per Minute with the radio preacher man. Some people just don't understand why I am the way I am. but I'm a radio preaching man.
That's what snakes do. They hiss. And that S on the end of harlots shows that this Babylonian woman is the mother of more than one daughter. She has daughters, and they're all harlots. Now, this doesn't mean that this woman is a real woman. There's no real woman riding a seven-headed, ten-horned beast that CNN is going to cover and say, hey, here's a woman. She's walking down the catwalk, or she's coming out of the Mediterranean riding a dragon. No, this is a symbol. This woman represents a false church. Babylon, the harlot, represents a false church, false Christianity. And the daughters of Babylon represent other false churches that came out of the mother. And so when the 144,000, it says, are not defiled with women, this is talking about the women of Babylon. It's talking about the mother and the daughters, the harlots of Babylon, which basically means that these are professed Christian organizations that have committed harlotry against the Lord. Just like Israel did in the Old Testament. In Ezekiel chapter 16, it describes Israel coming out of Egypt. God blessed Israel, but then she decked herself with all her jewels, and she went and played the harlot. And she enticed other nations to commit fornication with her. And that is some of the background behind the imagery of Revelation 17. So we need to look at the sacred symbols that are being used here. And we don't, when the Bible talks about a seven-headed, ten-horned beast, we don't take that literally. When it talks about a woman riding a beast, we don't take that literally. These are symbols in Revelation. And when it says that the 144,000 are not defiled with women, these are the women of Babylon, and it basically means that the 144,000 are followers of Jesus Christ that are not corrupted by false Christian churches, by false Christianity. And we certainly can see a lot of that today.
Good idea, good deal. And we are up on our second break here in just the next few seconds, Steve. So I think it's probably a good time to close that thought, or to at least put it on hold till after the break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Revelations Per Minute. And we are here tonight with the Radio Preacher Man, of course, and our guest is Steve WHOLBERG. And his website now is hisvoicetoday.com. He's the founder of White Horse Media. And we are so blessed to have him here. As he just mentioned in the last segment, he's been studying for 30 years. He's been a Bible scholar for many years now. And so we were talking before the break about the harlot and the great mother of harlots. Steve, real quick, I want to say then, so the 144,000 evangelists aren't necessarily Jewish, and they aren't necessarily virgins. Is that correct?
Well, let's look at the word virgin.
Mm-hmm.
I'll answer that in a minute. Back to 14:4, Revelation 14:4 talks about the 144,000. They are not defiled with women, and I've already, in the last segment, built my case that the women here, it's not talking about women like your wife. Right. It's talking about women like the women of Babylon. And the 144,000 are a separate people who are not contaminated by the false doctrines of Babylon, the mother and the daughters of Babylon, which refer to the churches that come out of Babylon. Now, then it also says they're virgin. The word virgin is used again and again in the New Testament, not specifically a reference to people that have never had sex, but to people who have a pure, or at least profess a pure faith. For instance, Matthew 25, verses 1 to 13, Jesus said at that time, the kingdom of heaven will be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 were foolish and 5 were wise. So Jesus looks at his church in the last days before he comes, and he described his church as virgins. And 5 of them are foolish virgins and 5 are wise virgins. Another passage is in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Let me just open my Bible to this. 2 Corinthians 11, verse 2. Paul is writing to the church of Corinth, and he said, I'm jealous over you with a godly jealousy, for I have espoused you to one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. So here Paul is calling the Corinthians, and many of these Corinthians were Gentiles. They weren't all Jews. And he applied these believers, he called them virgins.
Probably some of them were married and such as this. So
That's
they
right.
were definitely probably not all virgins either, eh?
That's right. So he's using the word virgin as a term that has to do with God's goal for Christians, that they would be pure and chaste for him, that they wouldn't be contaminated with the world. And so when Revelation says the 144,000 are all virgins and they're not defiled with women, this doesn't mean that they're all literal Jewish celibate men. It means that they are believers in Jesus Christ who are not corrupted by the deceptions of Babylon. And they are virgins for Christ, which means they're totally dedicated to Christ. They have a pure faith, an uncorrupted experience. Now, let's go back to chapter 7, where it talks about them as being from the 12 tribes. Revelation 7. If you look at verse 1, it says, after these things I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth. Now, let me ask you, Brian, does the earth have 4 corners?
No. I think it's round. We pretty well.
Yeah, that's right. We know that.
But yes, I see what you're saying.
But now but 4 corners means, it's a symbolic expression, and it means all over the world. Yes. And so you've got 4 angels standing on 4 corners, and they're holding the 4 winds. The 4 winds represent strife and disaster and problems all over the world, that God's angels are holding back these forces until the 144,000 are sealed with the seal of God. And that's what's happening in verses 2 and 3. Another angel comes down with the seal of the living God. He calls to the 4 angels and tells them to hold the winds until the 144,000 are sealed in their foreheads. Verse 4 says, I heard the number of them which were sealed. Now, John didn't actually count them. He just heard a number. Yes. And the number was 144,000 from all the tribes of the children of Israel. Now, the question is, are these only literal Jews? And then if you read verses 5, 6, and 7, and 8, it describes there's 12,000 from Judah, 12,000 from Reuben, 12,000 from Gad, and it lists these different 12 tribes, and there's exactly 12,000 from each one, and that's what John heard. Now, the fact is that many of these tribes don't exist anymore. They're just not there. And when you've got 12,000 exactly from each tribe, this is a very, very symbolic passage. God is trying to tell us something, that these tribes are his spiritual Israel. They're his people from all around the world that are a unit in his sight. He considers them a unit. And when you look at these different names, in fact, there's a couple of these tribes that are different from the 12 tribes in the Old Testament. If you look at the original 12 tribes that came out of Egypt, and then you compare these 12 tribes, there's a couple of tribes that have been switched. Ephraim is one of them. Ephraim was one of the original 12 tribes. And it's not in this list. When you read verses 5, 6, and 7, you won't find Ephraim here at all. And the reason why it was left out was because Ephraim went into idolatry. It says, Ephraim was joined to his idols. Let him alone. So that was that, and I think that from what I've studied, this list excludes Ephraim because many professed Christians have been joined to their idols, and they're not in this list. They're not part of the 144,000. They won't be part of the 144,000. And so the names have significance, the who's there, who's not there, and this whole list. And when you look at the context, like I said, there's so much symbolism. Four corners isn't literal. The earth does not have four corners. The seal of God placed on the foreheads of his people doesn't mean God's going to actually write something visible on top of the skin of their heads. It means he's going to seal them in their minds with the truth. When it says that they're not defiled with women, those aren't literal women. Those are the women of Babylon. When it says they're virgins, it doesn't mean they've never had sex. It means that they're pure followers of Jesus Christ who are uncorrupted. And I believe from putting all the pieces together that this Israel, when it says they're from all the tribes of the children of Israel, when you compare the word Israel here to Galatians 6:16, where Paul talks about the Israel of God, and in the book of Galatians, he's very clear that who can be part of the Israel of God? It's Gentiles and Jews who are true believers in Christ. Together, they're part of the Israel of God. So the Israel of God can be composed of Jews or Gentiles who are pure in their faith in Jesus Christ. Your wife can become part of the Israel of God. So can you. So can I. As I mentioned at the beginning of this program, when I was a teenager, I was involved in drugs and, as they say, sex and drugs and rock and roll. I lived a wild, crazy life in the Hollywood Hills, and I was Jewish, but I was not part of the Israel of God. It was only after I became a Christian, became a believer in Jesus, then I became part of the Israel of God. Prior to that, I was part of what Paul called the Israel of the flesh. In 1 Corinthians 10:18, he talked about Israel after the flesh. And then Galatians 6:16, he talked about the Israel of God. So I believe the 144,000 are part of the Israel of God. And they're separate from Babylon. And they're a composite group that it can be composed of Jews and Gentiles who have a pure faith in Jesus Christ and who are not contaminated by false religion. It just doesn't make sense to make them 100,000 literal Jewish celibate men. That kind of literalism was the same literalism that the Pharisees fell into. Jesus told the Pharisees one day, he said, if you destroy this temple, I'm going to rebuild it in 3 days. And they said, what? Who do you think you are? You're going to destroy the temple that took 46 years to build, and then you're going to rebuild it in 3 days? And they used that against him, and that was one of the things that they brought up at the Sanhedrin during his trial, was his statement. But Jesus didn't mean the literal temple when he said that. He was in fact, the text clarifies in John chapter 2 that he was talking about the temple of his body. He was talking about the temple of his body, but the Pharisees